I'm joined now by two colleagues from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Marieke Walsh is a reporter with the Globe and Mail, and John Ivison is a columnist with the National Post and Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Postmedia. Good to see you both. How surprised were you by Andrew Scheer's resignation today, and what do you think made him decide today's the day to go?
I mean, the party says, the people in his inner circle say that he's been thinking about this for quite some time. He made the decision in the last few days. I think, though, the timing is pretty remarkable given that we were all asking, or not all of us, but certainly some media outlets were asking about the Conservative Party paying for his kids or part of his kids' education. I think that could have been the tipping point for a lot of people.
That story was starting to percolate in the last number of days, John. How much of a role did that play in his decision?
I think that's the catalyst, but I think the decision, he'd already made the decision. People around him say his heart really wasn't in it. If this was a guy, if this is Harper, let's say, Harper would have moved the convention to Calgary or Saskatchewan, where it would be more advantageous to him than a convention in Toronto, and he would have brooked no opposition. He would have been arranging delegate selection meetings to make sure the 2,500 people in the room making the decision on Scheer's leadership in April were people he wanted in the room. I mean, these things don't just happen. Harper got nearly, I think he got 80% in 2004. That did not just happen. There was a war room set up to make it happen. And there was none of this happening with Scheer. And the suspicion among people close to him was that he really didn't have the fire in his belly to go for this again, that he was going to step away at some point, take a walk in the snow in January. And that was just advanced by the timing of this story, which, potentially his kids getting dragged through the mire for a month, and then he was going to go anyway.
It does speak to some extent about how his announcements of the past number of days that I'm going to fight this, I'm going to stay out, I'm going to challenge it, and then you have this story. It sort of seems to suggest how nasty things were going to become by people who wanted to get him out, right?
It's certainly how nasty things were becoming. I would disagree with John, though. I think that he was making what he thought were the right moves to stay on, but I think that it showed that all of his moves, there seemed to be sort of a lack of a political understanding on some of these things. Things like Leona Alislev, things like firing his
appointing her as the deputy
and
leader.
His chief of staff, appointing Leona Alislev, you're right, as the deputy leader. Those kinds of decisions really befuddled and baffled a lot of Conservatives who felt like strategically and politically they did not make sense either for timing or for other reasons, and it made them question his abilities to hang on to the job from that angle as well.
Let's look forward. What does the party need to be thinking? Well, let's talk about who you think who are some of the names you're hearing that might be interested in replacing Andrew Scheer?
Well, I think the party has got to get back in touch with the values of the Canadian public, the voting public. I think they were out of step with the Canadian voting public quite clearly on issues like the environment and issues of conscience like same-sex marriage and abortion. They've got to find somebody who is more in step with those values, and that suggests people like Peter MacKay, Rona Ambrose, potentially, although I don't think she is going to be interested in running. Erin O'Toole, I think, sees himself as a potential candidate, and I'm sure he will run. I think from Quebec, Gerard Deltel will be a potential candidate. He was thinking about it last time. He was worried about his English. I think he would be a very interesting candidate.
What especially Quebec caucus members on the Hill were saying today is that they want somebody who's perfectly bilingual. So that would take out a few of the people that you just mentioned. Now, not to say that that's how party members will go, but that's what they think is needed given Mr. Scheer's performance in the election.
French is the
French is needed,
minimum requirement to be a potential candidate.
But it turns out that Andrew Scheer's minimum level of French was not good enough, right?
I don't know about that.
That people saw it as
I don't know
a
about that.
communications challenge.
He didn't lose the election because his French wasn't good enough.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
I was with him right away around Quebec. It was tough for him. But he did not lose that election because he didn't lose seats in Quebec, particularly because of his poor French.
What Conservative caucus members are saying is that, when they're looking forward, having seen the last election, they want a perfectly bilingual person.
Well, they want a perfect candidate, and that perfect candidate doesn't exist, so they're going to have to.
But he also faced the trouble in Quebec. It accentuated in some cases his difficulties in French because he was constantly trying to answer questions about his position on social issues, right, and on the environment.
He was already on his heels.
He was always so. Okay, so let's finish on that. Let's finish a little bit on what the party really needs to do, notwithstanding who the leader might be. I mean, they're going to go ahead with this convention, it sounds like, and it's going to be a policy convention.
Well, we don't know that, though.
Well, the party suggested to me
Could be a
today
leadership
that it looks like they're
convention.
going to make it a policy convention right now. That could change, I guess. But don't they need to get the policy straight before they get a leader? I mean,
Well, but the thing is, with the leadership convention, the policies are different among the candidates, so you can't really prejudge what the policies are going to be, and then it turns out the candidate might not be in sync with those policies.
Yeah,
It wouldn't surprise me if they cancel this convention. They may make it a leadership convention, or they could cancel the convention in April and make a leadership convention later in next summer, May to October period.
yeah, does it seem like a tight timeline?
Pretty tight. I mean, but we
does
are in
seem
a
tight.
minority parliament, but you know, I think most people assume we're going to be here for 2 years because the NDP don't want another election.
I think that you can't have a policy convention until you have the leader. I think, you know, we've seen that time and time again, right? Look at the Ontario case. Doug Ford wins, and the Tories tore up their platform that they'd worked for months and months and months on, and had a new one. So I think that John is correct that you need to have the leader, because the leader brings forward a certain set of values that guide that policy. And I think that you need to have that debate in a leadership on policy in order to really suss out exactly where the Conservative Party wants to go on things like the climate, like the environment, that people say they were off the mark on.
All right. Thank you both for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.